Good morning, and thank you for that kind introduction. I'm here today to talk about jobs, how we got to the place where American companies have forgotten how to be great employers. But I'm also here to tell you that I'm betting my career that we are at the cusp of a sea change that will bring a new and much happier era for workers, where uniquely human capabilities are valued and rewarded. But before I do that, I want to thank the Social Innovation Summit and Landmark Ventures for having me here to speak today. There have been a lot of fantastic speakers covering critical issues from diversity and inclusion to climate change. And thanks to COVID and the broader movement for social justice, the issue of fair treatment of workers has finally taken center stage as a critical thing to unlock if we are finally to make progress on that forgotten letter in ESG, the S for social issues. Now, my own interest in this topic came from partnering with Governor Deval Patrick to build the first institutional grade social impact fund at Bain Capital Double Impact. I wrote a book about that experience called Accountable and have since helped found 2 Sigma Impact, a social impact business focused on driving superior investment returns by creating great jobs at our portfolio companies. 2 Sigma Impact is built on the premise that investing in humans isn't just a nice thing to do, it's great business. And as a private equity company, we typically make control investments in companies we own for many years. So we have both the opportunity and I believe the responsibility to affect positive workforce changes at those companies. Now, it's about time that workers became a focus for socially minded conferences like this one, because for the last 50 years or so, American workers, to put it bluntly, have gotten shafted. Have a look at this chart. For the post-war period, from the 40s through roughly the 1970s, the period chronicled in old shows like Happy Days, worker compensation, the green line, moved in lockstep with gains in productivity, represented by the yellow line. The US may have had many problems during this period, but from a workforce perspective, this was a time of broadly shared prosperity. Since the early 1970s, everything's changed. Productivity has increased by roughly 150%, while wages have been almost flat. So think of the profound implications of this. Workers have been shafted, sure enough, but that's only a small part of the overall story. We know that problems at work lead to mental and physical health issues, increases in mortality due to diseases of despair like addiction and suicide, and in the decline of psychological well-being of spouses and children. Neighborhoods where good jobs are few have low-quality housing, underfunded schools, few communities and recreational activities, and poor transportation and other public services. These features create the social, economic, and political exclusion of individuals and communities, making it more difficult for people to return to work and setting in motion a persistent cycle that is difficult to stop once it's started. These social issues are rooted in problems in our workforce economy, and in turn are exacerbated by issues of race and gender. And they lead to some very distorted outcomes in today's America. We hear a lot about economic inequality, but unbelievably, the gap in life expectancy between 2 adjacent neighborhoods in Boston, one rich and one poor, is, get this, 33 years. A 33-year life expectancy gap between 2 communities in the 21st century in the United States based on their economic situation. Now, the public policy response has been redistribution. Since the early 1960s, government transfers have gone up from roughly a quarter to nearly 3/4 of total spending. But what if redistribution alone isn't enough? What if our core social issues, especially but not limited to economic inequality, are rooted in a lack of good jobs and in the dignity that comes from purposeful work more than anything else? Now, how did we get to this place? My grandfather was born around the turn of the last century and lived into the 1980s. He never went to college, and he worked at one large railway company for his entire 45-year career. He started by doing low-level clerical work, and he ended in an executive role, with retiring with that proverbial gold watch and a comfortable pension. This employment model, sadly, is now dead and gone. The culprits are well known: offshoring, outsourcing, tech substitution, declining union membership. But the broader picture is one of efficiency gains at the expense of shared prosperity. And maybe to effectively deindustrialize, some of this damage was unavoidable. But the lack of reciprocal obligation between employer and employee, the sense that you're completely on your own, no matter how much service you have rendered to your company, is not a prerequisite for efficiency or long-term value creation at companies. What's more, we still have an education system designed for an industrial age, not for the 21st century. Lifelong learning is becoming more important, indeed critical, as the skills required to participate in the workforce are changing more rapidly. We also have healthcare and retirement systems that are based on 1950s levels of job stability, where people had one or two jobs for their entire careers. And with as many as a quarter of all jobs being displaced by technology in the coming decade, our jobs problem isn't going away anytime soon. Now, I've heard many people say that workforce issues like these are just a necessary part of the creative destruction that makes the American economy great. This is something for government to address. Well, business goes about making money for investors. And to that I say, well, not so fast. Workforce issues are real economic issues. Think of this: 50% of American workers today describe themselves as disengaged at work. But 13%, that's 1 in 8 workers, is so disaffected by the way they're treated on the job that they actively work against the interests of their employers. 1 in 8 workers. Workforce disengagement is a $500 billion drag on GDP, and yet while many companies pay lip service to worker issues, HR sophistication trails marketing sophistication by roughly 50 years. And it's certainly not the only cause, but the period of cutting jobs and benefits in favor of efficiency has also been characterized by lower economic growth relative to the prior period. Meanwhile, however, our financial markets and our tax code punish investment in workers. If you want to build a factory or invest in technology, investors understand that. If you want to invest in workers, investors assume you have gone soft. Just look at what happened to Home Depot stock after they announced they would support workers early in the COVID period. Now, I come from an industry that has a pretty bad record on jobs. Private equity employs roughly 9 million Americans and has shed roughly 1 million jobs in the past decade at those companies. The industry came of age during a time when American business was thought to be slipping into complacency and where greater efficiency was required to compete with companies like Germany, Japan, and other emerging economies. But while American businesses may have been fat 20 or 30 years ago, they certainly aren't today. The biggest problem for many businesses is attracting and retaining people with the right skills and then unlocking their discretionary effort, that extra focus that comes from employee engagement. But unfortunately, we're still stuck in the world of Dilbert, where companies say nice things about workers, but tend to prioritize next quarter's earnings. So why am I so optimistic that this is all about to change? Now, thanks to COVID, awareness of the importance of frontline workers will undoubtedly lead to some positive things. But the most important long-term driver of gains for workers will be technology. Technology has long been viewed primarily as a threat to workers, but I believe it is about to change the workforce economy substantially for the better. First, technology is helping to fill the huge and growing gap between our calcified education system and the changing needs of the workforce economy. As I mentioned before, roughly 1 billion people will need to be reskilled by 2030 because of tech disruption. Now, Two Sigma Impact has invested in Penn Foster, a vocational training business that serves 300,000 students per year, training them for middle-income jobs like veterinary technician or nurse's assistant. If you recently lost your job and you want to develop a durable skill in a growing job category, you can go study for between $50 and $100 per month in one of Penn Foster's programs and greatly improve your lifetime earning potential. Meanwhile, Penn Foster captures an enormous amount of data on learners seeking vocational training. We plan to use that data to better tailor our programs to individual needs. We are also helping students to decide what programs are best for them based on their work and education history, their interests, and also job availability. Second, technology allows all companies to do a better job of measuring the quality of the jobs they provide to their employees and work to improve them over time. This isn't just a nice thing to do, it's good business. The most valuable businesses of tomorrow will be those that activate their workers and keep them up to date on skills acquisition. Concrete progress also requires better measurement. One of the issues preventing good job creation is that it often requires investment now for an uncertain payoff later. If we can prove that good job creation leads to an attractive payoff, then we can help influence the private equity system and maybe the broader economy for the better. Third and finally, technology is good at many things, but it also lays bare the things that robots and computers can't do effectively. Customer service is one of them. How many of you would prefer your customer service issues handled by a computer rather than a human? How many of you would prefer that the home health needs of your parents were handled by a robot rather than a human? And as a recent report from Bank of America shows, many jobs are actually enhanced by technology rather than replaced by them. And technology is creating new fields for humans almost by the month. Now, will all of this lead to a better era for workers? Well, no one has a crystal ball, but at 2 Sigma Impact, we're focused on workers and making sure that they have the key components of a good job: fair pay and employment terms, training and career paths, a voice in the running of their companies, and a sense of affiliation with their employer's mission. When you understand how a company performs on these dimensions, you can unlock all the many win-wins related to investment in people. After all, most economic value at public companies today is not factories or hard assets. It's now intangibles, with employees and corporate culture being chief among them. If we impact investors can help private equity to lead on these issues, we believe we can play our part in building a more prosperous and equitable capitalism. Thank you.